welcome to another edition of the Hispanic Patriot, a podcast broadcast live from a secret and undisclosed location deep behind enemy lines here in Denver, Colorado. Here we speak the truth and nothing but the truth, so help us God. Now, without further ado, our co-host Nick Russo and host Hugo Chavez Ray. Give it up for Nick and Hugo.
All right, there we go. This is another great night. We are here in Denver, Colorado, and my co-host is down in Colorado Springs, and we are expecting a major snowstorm. So we're snuggled up, nice and warm inside our homes. So in the studio, we've got a great show for you tonight. A very special guest, good friend of mine, Mr. Jimmy Sengenberger, who is a young millennial radio host, podcaster, columnist. Jimmy he plays the harmonica, has got a band. I mean, Jimmy is full of surprises, but very energetic guy, and he'll be on with us here shortly. But we've got a full show for you tonight. We're going to be, talking about some topics that are near and dear to my heart and Nick. We're going to be talking about the Colorado GOP. We're going to be talking a little bit about the breaking news with Ken Buck, who has decided after he announced he was going to not run in November, all of a sudden now decides he's going to resign next week. And there's a lot to talk about there. And I think he's trying to cause issues with some others out there in the Republican Party. So we'll definitely be discussing that. But without further ado, we're going to get into this thing because my good friend Jimmy Sengenberger has graciously agreed to join us tonight. We promise to be cordial and not too contentious, but no. In all honesty, Jimmy and I are good friends, and we may not always agree on everything, but we still remain friends. So that's the important thing. So, Mr. Sengenberger, that's all E's, no A's or U's or anything else. On his radio show, they used to call him the Mighty Mite from the right, the Smarty from the party, and the what's that other one?
The heavyweight of debate.
The heavyweight of debate. There we go, Jimmy. How are you, buddy?
Hey, I am doing just fine. How are you?
Are you ready for the snow?
I'm never ready. I'm tired of the snow, but here it is. We have to deal with it, right?
You live in an apartment, though, right?
Yes, exactly. I'm elsewhere tonight, though. So
okay.
Getting things situated here is a little different. I couldn't get my mic and do the whole setup for you, but I wanted to.
All right. Well, Jimmy, we're going to open up. And let you, not that a lot of the audience don't know you, but some of them may not. And hopefully we're reaching folks outside of our realm here. So just give us a little bit of background on yourself and introduce yourself to the audience.
Well, I am somebody who's been in media for a very long time. I started when I was in college. Actually, before college, I was thinking about this. I was in the student newspaper staff at my high school in Grandview High School. And I recalled this because Ted Harvey's running, of course, for Congress in the 4th Congressional District. And on Saturday night, as Hugo knows, because he was there, I had the privilege of moderating a 4th Congressional District debate, which went, I thought, really well and was fascinating. And in 2008, Ted Harvey ran for Congress against Mike Kaufman, who won, and then Will Armstrong. And I interviewed all three of them for the Grandview High School Chronicle newspaper way back then in the 2008 cycle, and then went on to college where I started a campus radio show, and as well was on the student newspaper staff there and an editor at the Regis University Highlander. And the day I graduated from Regis, I filled in on 710 KNUS for the very first time, not quite 21. And then in just a few weeks back, I sunset that program, but we went 10 and a half years with it. I'm a twice weekly columnist for the Denver Gazette, where I do a lot of investigative work. And now I've got some other projects cooking. I'm on Substack with something called Intrepid Inquiries, a podcast and newsletter. I've got a blues podcast called Blues Business. I mean, a lot of different irons in the fire, and I know nothing else, as you well know me, Hugo.
Well, I mean, nobody can ever say you're not opinionated. That's for sure.
And know how to express those opinions, right?
But I guess
Very nice.
that can apply to all of us.
Amen.
Jimmy, I don't know if you've met Nick, but Nick is another millennial that met
Another one.
Another one. Yes. Interestingly enough, a little bit about how Nick and I met. I had made a post, or he had made a post or something, and we commented on the post, and we got into a little contentious debate. And at the end of it all, we decided that, hey, we're on the same side.
You know what's funny about that, Hugo? That was actually kind of a boomer millennial thing too. That's what we kind of like settled on. It's like, okay, that's kind of our tagline at this point now. Both all the generations.
I had offered that to Jimmy a while back, and he didn't like that.
Well, but Hugo, have you told Nick that I'm your favorite millennial?
I have.
I'm getting there. I'm getting there. Jimmy.
You will. You will get there. You'll trump me pretty quick.
There you go.
That dates back to 10, 12 years ago. So yeah, I was always impressed with Jimmy's talent and his get up and go. He graduated from Regis, right?
Regis University, class of 2012 and 2011, excuse me. I was supposed to graduate in 2012, but I got out a year early. I'm leadership program of the Rockies, class of 2012. That's what I meant.
Jimmy, actually, we're of the same class, actually, then, because 2008 was my political awakening, too. I think a lot of millennials under Obama, we had the chance to kind of, show that we were different.
Well, let me just say, Nick, I didn't have an awakening because I was at the ripe old age of 13, 20 years ago this summer when I first got involved in politics at the Arapahoe County Republican Men's Club breakfast. So I've always
very nice. So middle school, even earlier. Very nice.
It was the late, great Rush Limbaugh who, when I was 12 years old, thanks to my grandfather, really got me interested in radio and politics. And it was always just riveting to me. And look where I am today.
Rush was the greatest. I'm an original ditto head. I ran into Rush's show on a road trip in South Texas one day when I was out in the middle of nowhere, and I was zipping through AM channels, because down there you can't pick up hardly anything. And
sure,
all of a sudden I stumbled across this station, and it was Rush. I didn't know who he was at the time. I started listening, and he was doing something about the bimbo eruptions or something else. And the more I listened to him, the more I said, "Oh my God, I love this guy." And so, but by the time I got back to San Antonio, where I lived at the time, I found it on KOA, the big booming station down there. And the rest is history. I was hooked. Got to listen to all of his shows. And then I remember when he started his TV show.
Yes.
Believe it or not, I have a box full of VHS tapes where I taped a lot of his TV shows.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping to convert those into digital before they.
Hugo, my grandpa Walt, went to, I think, 4 of those in person and was in the studio audience. So
wow.
I've always been jealous of him for that.
Yeah, those were in New York, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. That's where the studio was. And, he did that show, 2 or 3 years? I can't remember.
Yeah.
And then he decided that wasn't the venue that he wanted to pursue.
Yeah, TV is a little different from radio, especially when you have the style that Rush did. But I mean, that was
Yeah.
the heyday for Rush in the sense that not only was he doing the live shows, but he would go to massive crowds at sellout halls
Yep.
and put on these shows. And it was just, I've watched some of them on YouTube, and it was just uncanny the things that he would do with his ditto heads from all across the country as he traveled all around. I mean, that guy really knew how to build an audience, and he was truly a master of the craft.
I remember the bake sale he did up here in Fort Collins, and they showed video of the crowd. It was massive. So interesting that he had done that in Fort Collins back then. I guess Fort Collins wasn't the liberal heyday that it is now.
Right.
But yeah, that was great. So, I want to get into some really topical news, but of course, we have breaking news about our illustrious representative from CD4, Mr. Ken Buck, who has gone rogue, and I think he's trying to morph into Joe Scarborough for CNN or MSNBC. I don't know what's going on, but he had announced his retirement, so to speak, by not running again for the seat. And then yesterday, I think it was, or the day before, he said, well, I'm going to quit now. So what's your take on that, Jimmy? I mean, that's just something that boggles my mind. I have my own ideas about why he's doing it, but
yeah, I think it's too bad in a couple of respects. I mean, sure, a lot of folks are going to be glad to see him out of Congress. He's changed quite a bit in the last couple of years, I think folks would say. But regardless of how you feel about him leaving office, one of the issues that's coming to my mind is you're now going to have a special election held the same day as the primaries, which means in CD4, you will have two separate elections. They're not able to do it as the same election. These are two separate elections, and logistically, the election staff have to figure out how they're going to do it. And of course, you've thrown a big monkey wrench into the selection process for the primary candidates and how that's going to work, because only one person can get elevated from a vacancy committee, which is basically the central committee for CD4, and get elevated into the position as being the Republican nominee at the on the special election ballot. So that means one of these candidates, whomever will be, won't be Lauren Boebert. She's already taken herself out of the running. Will be on two ballots, and everybody else won't be. I don't know. I mean, it throws a big monkey wrench in a lot of ways, and I think it would have been better, frankly, for him to serve out the rest of his year in office.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on that, Nick?
Well, I think it's kind of typical of people who forget the importance of their office rather than themselves. And you see this a lot with people who have been in office for quite a long time. That's what changes is that you feel that you are the important product rather than the office you come from. So I think that he just wasn't particularly concerned with the logistical issues that he would cause. This is probably better for him. And, he just wanted to pass the buck, I guess, a little earlier than he meant to. But that's my main point is right there is when you forget the office and not yourself, you do things that cause problems for other people, and you kind of don't care.
I was reading the column or the article, and I watched the video of him with Dana Bash on Tuesday. It was yesterday, and he basically, he threw a jab at Donald Trump, whom he's not a big fan of.
Most people leaving politics these days aren't.
And he says, I'm resigning my seat and creating a vacancy in my district. Everywhere I go in Colorado, I hear that people are not happy with Trump and they're not happy with Biden. And I think we need to change our electoral laws here. I have no idea what he meant by that. Change our electoral laws? I don't know. Do you know what he means by that, Jimmy?
I'm not sure. I'd be curious to know more. I assume we'll hear something. He sounds like he's going to be involved with some organization, but I don't know what he particularly meant about that. I mean, I think to me, him leaving Congress was inevitable. That's why he said he wasn't going to run for re-election. It's the timing that's the interesting thing, because this does make it more difficult for Lauren Boebert. So a lot of folks have speculated that maybe it could be a slight at Boebert, making it so that she gets this advantage in the Republican primary. But it certainly does have impacts across the board. So I don't know what's going on in that regard. I mean, I think that with Ken Buck, I don't know that he's changed as much as people think on policy issues. I think it's more that not on everything, but it's largely the politics. However he's approaching, for whatever reason, he's approaching politics differently. And that's a little different from the policy side. You can see how he's approached things like the Hunter Biden story or Mayorkas and the politics there, or you can see in terms of elections, in terms of leaving office now. That's more about politics than about policy. And so I think that's where we have to wonder, okay, what's going on here with Ken Buck as far as his political approaches differently from the public policy? And it's a distinction that might be difficult for some folks to wrap their heads around, but I think that's the distinction to be made here. What do you guys think?
I mean,
I agree with that.
In grassroots circles in this state, he is now officially persona non grata. I can tell you that, just from speaking to a lot of people that I know. But I have my own ideas about what's motivating him. Part of it is that rumor about him looking for a nice cushy job at CNN or MSNBC, and also those rumors about him joining a prestigious law firm in DC. So he's become a swamp rat, I think, in terms of what we consider swamp rats, and for that perspective, he's become even more of a rabid never Trumper. So he's made his bed, and we'll see how it plays out. But I have my own thoughts on that. So I'm going to reserve until I see what breaks. But the other thing that he said in his interview with Dana Bash, he was saying that he may not be the only one resigning the Republican House, and he's saying that the article goes on to say that like could be as many as 5 other House Republicans could resign. I have my doubts on that after reading some of the names. I think there may be a couple that don't, run again or try to go for re-election, but I'm not sure that any of them are going to jump ship like he did. And the fact that he didn't even give the speaker the courtesy of notifying him. He totally
really, I hadn't seen that.
Okay. Yeah, Mike Johnson said this was a total surprise to him. He never talked to him. That's just not decorum there. He should have at least had a conversation with the speaker saying, okay, this is what I've decided I'm going to do, blah, blah, blah. You don't just blindside. Yeah, you don't give somebody, blindside like that. But anyway, that's something that's going to play out, and we'll see how it goes. Let's jump over to the State of the Union. Who watched the whole thing?
Oh yeah,
I did.
Yeah.
Without falling asleep. That's the record.
Me too. I managed to suffer my way through it, and I have to tell you, that was quintessential Biden as he is today when he's actually on script and he's angry. He's the angry old man yelling at the clouds, and it's true. It's true. It's his attitude.
Oh yeah.
And it was hyper partisan. It was intolerable in so many respects. And, to me, I have one pet peeve, and that is about a president, I don't care who you are, blasting the Supreme Court while they're sitting there unable to respond to the State of the Union. I remember in, 2010, after the Supreme Court had ruled in the Citizens United case. And by the way, that was the right decision for free speech. Yes, it has allowed a lot more money into politics, but it was the right thing for the First Amendment and free speech. And Barack Obama was there, and he said, with all due deference to separation of powers. And then he went on to criticize the Supreme Court. Well, his vice president at the time is now the president of the United States. And he did that exact same thing this time on the decision over Roe versus Wade and overturning that in the Dobbs case. And to me, that is just beneath what the president should do and was woefully inappropriate. I mean, and that's just an example of the kind of partisan behavior that we had from Joe Biden, who basically, the number of times that he kept referencing Trump as my predecessor, he could have never done that if he was just running against somebody else. But he was able to say my predecessor was a backdoor campaign speech. And that was beneath the president, too.
Yeah, and I got a kick out of Speaker Johnson sitting behind him. I could just see some of the things he was thinking. They should have put one of those little bubbles above his head. That would have made it perfect. But
Exactly.
yeah, he totally went off script as far as decorum. With a State of the Union speech is not meant to be a partisan speech like that, and it was more of a campaign speech than it was a State of the Union speech.
Exactly.
And for him to sit there and look in the camera and tell the American people that we have the best economy in the world at the moment, and that inflation is at an all-time low. And I mean, who does he think he was kidding? I mean,
Democrats.
I don't know. I mean, I can't believe that even they were believing some of the stuff he was saying.
Hugo and Nick, I mean, this is the guy who coined the phrase Bidenomics. Now, Reaganomics was a real thing, but Reagan didn't come out and say, well, everybody, this is Reaganomics.
He didn't call it himself. Like,
exactly.
He didn't name the thing. Like, well,
Yep.
and Jimmy, actually, he actually went a little bit further. He actually threatened the Supreme Court. He said that women have electoral power too. The Supreme Court, those two powers don't intersect. Electoral power doesn't or shouldn't affect judicial power. So I think this is him saying, hey, I might make a play for the court. And another thing I thought that a lot of people might have missed, he made a reference to a gaffe he made under Obama when he referenced Obamacare. Did anyone catch that?
Yeah.
He said, it's a big deal. Well, when he was caught on camera, he said, it's a big effing deal.
Yes.
Yeah.
So he made a reference to his own swear, on public television in the middle of the State of the Union. I mean, the decorum just was out the window. It really was. It was absurd. He was not the FDR he thought he was.
Nick, what did you make of the back and forth between Biden and the Republicans throughout the speech? I've never seen anything like it.
And I'm sure that, watching politics since we were a young age, like, we have an expectation of what this is going to be. And when Trump had like his heckle moment, he had his, you weren't supposed to do that. That was friendly. That was like, hey, let's take a moment and break character. For him, he was like actively fighting with his own Congress. And then he wants to blame that Congress when they don't give much needed aid to Ukraine and many other things we need at the border. He wants to pretend that it's the Republicans that he's insulting that are the problem. He's demonstrating to the American people there, I hope everyone sees, that he is the obstruction. At the end of the day, he is the one who tells the Democrats, we look better when they do nothing. And so Ukrainians die, people at the border die, people that are, and he mentioned a little girl who was killed by an illegal migrant. Like, he isn't a huge reason why there's a migrant crisis. I mean, it was...
And then he turns around and apologizes for using the term illegal.
And then says, oh, well, I lost kids, so I don't like when he does it. I've lost family members, too. It's like, you don't sympathize with people by saying, I went through what you through, because every death is different.
Yeah.
I really don't like when he does that.
His kid wasn't brutally murdered.
No.
That big difference. And then he couldn't even say her name right. He called her Lincoln Riley when he had the button that he had been given in his walk into and it clearly says Lakin, but he called her Lincoln, and then just went
mixed
on.
Up with the president, I guess. You know what I mean?
But that was the only time he really had a big flub. Let's cut him a little slack, guys.
You've been cutting him slack for almost 16 years, 40 years, whatever.
50.
Hugo, you've been cutting him slack longer than we have.
50. I was I was like 20 or when he first got into Congress.
He ended saying, I was born amid World War II. It's like, yeah, we know. We can tell.
We sure do.
Yeah, and they definitely had him souped up on something. I mean, he couldn't have lasted that long on his regular, because it was way past his bedtime when he said it. And then he was 20 minutes late because his own people were protesting against him and blockading the road.
Yeah, that's
sure to everybody and like talk to everybody too. Yeah, Jimmy.
That's one of the fascinating things to me has been this divide on the left. I mean, this is the first incumbent president. It was American Samoa, but still, it's the first incumbent president in 44 years to lose any kind of primary election. And that was, again, in American Samoa. But nevertheless, it was the case that history was made by Joe Biden this cycle already. And that's how that history was made, is he lost a primary. And you can look at the divides, and it's because the far left has taken over so much of this party, particularly on issues like Israel and Hamas, where the anti-Semitism, whether it's here in Colorado or it's nationally in Congress or wherever you're talking about, the anti-Semitism has run amok unabated by the Democrats who don't know what to do. And so Biden is having to backpedal and waffle and try to have it both ways increasingly because so many people in his base are ramped up and amped up against Israel now. And that's why he had a difficult time in Michigan. And it's one of the big reasons why Democrats across the country are saying, especially younger Democrats are saying, oh, we're not so keen on Joe Biden right now. And to me, let's just look at it two ways. Number one, that's a big problem that he has to address politically, and that will hamper him in his run for re-election. But on the other hand, it also says a lot about where the left is these days, because it is the worst, most horrifying position that you could have for so many people in your base to embrace or tolerate anti-Semitism like this. And yet here we are.
Yep. Well,
well, actually, Jimmy, I'm sure you actually know the history of anti-Semitism in the Democrat Party, and the Black Panthers, and we could probably, talk about that for a long time, that it's always been sort of a subtle undercurrent of leftist policies, but it's just becoming
undercurrent
now.
Right.
Bubbling up more and more now, I guess.
They used to consider the Jewish people in the country to be very much part of their base. And now, not so sure what they're thinking right now in that regard. It's like, okay, we could just dismiss this minority because there's a much louder group that we're more concerned about.
Hey, well, welcome to the Hispanic base as well, my friend. You know what I mean? It's the same treatment over here. You know what I mean? It's like the base at this point, like you said, is ideological. It's not racial. It's not. That's what a lot of Democrats tried to do under Trump, was make it racial. Now it's all ideological. You're completely right about that.
Yeah.
So let's shift over to a local topic, and that's the migrant crisis. What are your thoughts on that, Nick?
Well, as a Hispanic myself, I've always been very passionate about legal and illegal migration. When I was younger, I helped on all sides, making sure people were legal, helping people if they were in desperate situations. But as I got older and realizing the mechanisms of what I call just labor exploitation, that's a big reason why Democrats allow and encourage this border crisis. I see the negative effects on our people, the Hispanic community, and the way that it's almost like a Brown v. Board of Education situation, where we literally are almost sort of taught that we are inferior citizens because we are pawns in this game. And so if we were no longer pawns, if the migrants were no longer pawns to the Democrats, they would actually be able to assimilate, because Americans aren't pawns, Americans aren't slaves. And that's what keeps these people from assimilating and enjoying the benefits of America, is these corporations that Democrats are in bed with are keeping them as slaves. And Americans, that's not what we are. That's at least my perspective.
Well, the other thing that our illustrious mayor here in Denver came out with is that his solution is going to be to cut budgets of several city departments in order to help pay for the migrants. And I almost bite my tongue when I have to say migrants. They're illegal immigrants. Darn it!
There you go.
I'm a legal immigrant, so I can say that.
There you go.
We can all say that. We can all say, acknowledge illegal immigration is the problem. We're not talking about legal immigration here. We are talking about people who are immigrating to this country illegally. And the big problem for Denver is that the city and the people in it are having to suffer through the consequences of a policy that has been in place for years called sanctuary city status. And that is something that invites illegal immigrants. And then this promise that was given out that we're going to provide all these services. It was funny. I wrote a column in the Denver Gazette a couple of weeks ago where I pointed out that Mayor Johnston basically admitted himself that the migrants, illegal immigrants, were coming to Denver because of the different services that they were provided, because he said that now that we're not providing as much, 40 to 60% of them are leaving for other cities on city chartered buses. So if they're leaving because there aren't enough services, doesn't that tell us? Exactly. There were so many services provided that were incentivizing people to come to and then stay in Denver. So stop bringing out the welcome mat and recognize that it is your own fault for putting us into this position. Pull back on that policy and then go to Bennett and Hickenlooper and the Democrats who dominate the congressional delegation in the House and say, you guys need to do something and force Biden's hand on this. But of course, they won't, because they have a constituency that doesn't want them to touch this. Multiple constituencies for various reasons. You got the business interests. You hit on a little bit, Nick. You also have those who have other reasons in terms of progressive mentalities, and they just want open borders and what have you. And that's a part of the party that the leaders and among the Democrats have to reckon with. And they're not doing it well because they are simply allowing this to continue. And just, they'll complain about it. They'll pay a little bit of lip service, but that's all you're getting from them.
Yep.
Yeah. And my theory, not really a theory, I believe firmly that the reason we can't solve the problem, number one, if I had a magic wand and let's say I had the power for one day, my solution to this illegal immigration situation would be to go after the employers that employ illegal immigrants. And I'm going to use a comparison to my own home country in Peru. I was just down there for Christmas, and Venezuelans have overrun Peru. But you know what the difference is? They can't work legally in Peru. Nobody will hire them. Nobody will do anything, because if they get caught, they get fined and or jailed heavily. So if we want to dry up the illegal immigration thing, then we need to dry up the jobs, because they come here to work. Okay. And look, I don't begrudge people wanting to have a better life, of course, but darn it, do it the right way. You know, there's a process, and we can have a reasonable discussion about some reforms we may need about the immigration process, but that doesn't mean that we just open the borders and let the place be overrun.
Well, and Hugo, I wanted to mention real quick, if we could blame Joe Biden a little bit more for this. This has to do also with inflation and prices and wages. All of our financial issues, because the people, especially young people who should be taking these jobs, especially people in the lower middle class who could use these jobs to finance families and increase their standard of living, those jobs are going to illegals. And the reason the businesses are doing it is because the Biden machine and the machines before it that he was allied with have turned our economy towards this system where exploitation is more profitable than honest business. It's all tied together. The inflation, the prices, the wages, the fact that we can't pay our own people better, the fact that we can't educate people because leftist universities don't do that anymore, if they ever did. All these problems are compounding together, and the people in the city and the people at the border suffer so horribly for it. And it is a huge part of Biden's fault.
And you couple that with the fact that we're ignoring our own American citizens, veterans that are homeless,
would love these jobs.
People that are down and out that are homeless, mentally ill people that need help. You know, we're not taking care of our own, and we're giving money to people who have come here illegally. That makes absolutely no sense. There was a place up in New York. I think it was Staten Island. It was a home. It was a retirement home. I don't know if you heard about this, Jimmy, but it was 3 or 4 months ago. I read about it. They cleared out the home. They kicked out veterans and elderly people to make room to house illegal immigrants. Okay. And I remember watching the interview of this one elderly veteran. I think he was like 90 or something, and he was in tears. They had kicked him out on the street to make room for illegal immigrants. That to me is just abhorrent. And
that was happening here too. Well, in hotels, the homeless people who were in being put up in hotels were kicked out so that the illegal immigrants could go in.
Yep. And you see what's happening in Chicago. The black community in particular in Chicago is up in arms. They have stormed city council. They're basically, this one lady was interviewed up there and she says, I've been voting Democrat all of my life. This November, I will vote Republican for the first time in my life. She says, I am tired of these Democrats who promise the moon and deliver nothing. And then this insult to injury thing where they're taking resources away from the community to give to people who have come here illegally. And a lot of them are ingrates, not all of them, but a lot of them are. And one of these people were out there taunting some of the black citizens. And I said, boy, that's a mistake. That's a powder keg getting ready to happen, because people are not happy. And I've been watching some of the podcasts of some of the black podcasters, and they're talking about Chicago and New York and LA and other places where they're just fed up in the black community. The numbers are continuing to climb. Now the media tries to play it down, but I think that they're in for a big surprise in November with minority voters.
It's something that I think is it's pretty striking to see a lot of the changes going on, especially in terms of the cities that are dealing with the brunt of this. Now, I don't know how much you will see gains, big picture, for Republicans in a lot of these cities. We shouldn't overstate that case. But the fact that we have seen a trend in that direction, particularly as we've had so much ineptitude from the left on these issues, does tell us a lot about how important it is to have proactive policies that are strong on the southern border, that enforce our criminal laws, that address the issues of education in a way that respects parents rather than derides parents. And the list goes on, because there's so much backlash that is coming because people are frustrated and they are fed up. I actually think more of what you will see is probably people choosing not to vote than necessarily getting out there and voting for a Republican, which probably helps Republicans anyway.
That's just as damaging. That's just as damaging to the left. But I'm sure you've seen the reports that say that if Democrats don't get 90+% of the black vote, they can't win. And some of the numbers I've seen is that support has dwindled from Democrats. Again, to your point, that doesn't mean necessarily they're going to vote Republican, but I've seen a number of around 23% that has basically abandoned the Democrat Party. And if that's anywhere near accurate, they're in deep trouble.
Actually, that's actually something that happened in Chicago. I agree, Jimmy. It probably will not translate to electoral map changes. But being from Chicago myself, I have a little bit of insight from the mayoral race. I would definitely suggest anybody look at the recent mayoral race for Chicago, because there was a huge grassroots campaign by, I forget his name right now, but he's a Greek gentleman. He was a moderate Democrat, really much more blue doggish. The conservatives in Chicago were basically, I wouldn't say over the moon, but they definitely were extremely happy to find somebody who didn't deride them, who actually respected their needs and their community's needs. And he lost to the machine anyways. And that really woke a lot of people up in the Democrat cities to, hey, they'll shut you down just as much as they shoot down Republicans if they don't like what you want. It's not even what you're saying. This isn't ideological at this point. This race wasn't ideological in Chicago. It really was about, we're the people in control. You're the people who are allied with the enemy, with the Republicans, and we don't want you. That shot to the face, I think, really will wake a lot of people up to say, hey, we need to have coalitions between the Republican minority in all the cities and the moderate Democrats to try to get some people. And you'll see a hollowing out of Democrat cities. They'll still be electing Democrats, but you probably won't see the far leftists that you've seen dominate cities lately.
The important thing in that regard, I think you raise a good point, Nick, is Republicans then need to, for a variety of reasons and in a variety of ways, get out of their own way. because so much of what we're seeing is a consequence in terms of Democrat gains, like in Colorado of late, is that Republicans aren't gathering together in a unified front and in what I would say are the right ways to beat back against the Democrats. And instead, we're getting in our own way. We're having all sorts of things internally that are going on in the Republican Party. And you need to have a cohesive opposition that is focused on defeating Democrats. And yet I don't see that happening. I think Republicans in Colorado are picking a lot of issues that they shouldn't and having a lot of internal discord that is proving to be very problematic and preventing the party from taking advantage of a ripe opportunity, which is such a sense of disenfranchisement and such a sense of that they've been so many people in this state that they are not being cared for, that the Democrats have cast them aside.
Okay.
And
let's not jump the gun too quickly. That's going to be our topic coming on. So I want to let the cat
relevant
out.
Relevant.
We're going to get there. Just one more topic that I wanted to cover real quick. The new RNC leadership. It looks like President Trump has got his team now in control of the RNC from the top, and just wanted to get your thoughts on that, Jimmy. Michael Whatley, former North Carolina state chairman, and daughter-in-law Lara Trump are now at the top of the RNC.
Yeah, so, I think this it consolidates Trump's position in the party going into his reelection bid. I have to say I like Lara Trump a lot. I've interviewed her on a few occasions. In fact, in 2020, just before COVID hit, remember the big rally down in Colorado Springs that Trump had? And it was an electrified atmosphere, whether you're a Trump fan or not.
Actually.
So did I. Hugo, you were there too, right?
Yep.
Say what you will about Trump. Love him, hate him. If you happen to fall in between, he knows how to bring the real entertainment. He wants the best show on earth, not just in politics, but the best show on earth. But the night before, Lara Trump went and spoke at a rally in Aurora, and I interviewed her backstage one-on-one. And I just so happened to have my harmonicas with me. And she invited me to perform right there on stage. So I basically introduced Lara Trump. Well, I introduced Mike Pence's nephew, who introduced Lara Trump. But nevertheless, I was part of that opening by doing just a little bit of riffing on harmonica at her request. So I think it's cool that she's a part of that. I like her a lot. I don't know much about Whatley, but she is from North Carolina. So is he. So I think there's a North Carolina thing going on here. And we'll see what happens. I don't have much to say except that I'm not surprised that Ronna McDaniel eventually stepped down. It is interesting, though, that in this case, Ronna was Donald Trump's candidate during that RNC race, and she won. And then Trump, hearing pressure from people outside, from activists across the country, then he changed his mind and sort of was guided by those folks, whereas normally Trump's the one doing the guiding. So I just found that rather interesting. I don't know much about Whatley. We'll see what happens, and especially the fundraising piece, because that's key. I see that they're cutting a lot of RNC positions. I hope that's not a sign of financial troubles, and that's a sign of just consolidating the forces so that the GOP is able to mount their efforts, not just for Trump, but for the Senate and for the House of Representatives, because you need a multifaceted infrastructure there.
They had, what I read was they cleared out about 60 people in a house cleaning, and they called it like trimming the fat, so to speak. Plus, I think some of it had to do also with like-mindedness, and they wanted to get their own people in there. The thing about Ronna, I think that did her in more than anything is the fact that she was related to Mitt Romney, and Mitt Romney is persona non grata in the Republican Party.
Yes.
He's done himself in, and I think that's kind of part of, not the whole thing, but I think part of that animosity towards her started growing as she became more non-compliant.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, though, about this non-compliant thing, because she really was all hands on deck in terms of 2020 and what have you. I mean, I think that she was actually trying to do her job, but you have a lot of discord, and she ended up having to step down as a result of that. And probably for the better. She's been in office for a long time in that position, and it's good to eventually get a little bit of fresh blood in there. So at least there's some benefit I could see, but I think there was probably more going on, and she ended up sort of just bearing the brunt of some angst that was bigger picture than just Ronna McDaniel or Mitt Romney.
Right. Well, I'm holding out good hopes, praying for them, and making sure that that the party, at least from the RNC down, starts looking into more of what we need to do as a party, as far as uniting and going after the common enemy, which in this case is what I call the Marxist Democrat Party.
Okay.
That's
fair.
That's my own label. I'm sorry, and I'm little known fact, I am a former Democrat. So this goes back many decades for me, and Jimmy Carter was the last straw for me. I signed up for the Ronald Reagan campaign in Texas, and the rest is history.
So Reagan helped you see the light of the right. I appreciate that. Very good.
Yep.
He did for many, didn't he?
Absolutely. Well, before that, I was just one of those young rabble rousers, that was going along to get along and following all the radicals of the day, the 60s and the early 70s. I wasn't really paying attention, but then, a light came on after my Air Force stint, and I just, I did the right thing and never looked back. So now we come to the hot topic of the night, which is going to be the Colorado GOP. Now, I've read some of your articles, Jimmy, as well as some others. One in particular that came out was from CPR News, and the headline was, "I don't trust the state party anymore. Colorado GOP leader Dave Williams under fire by party members over controversial tactics and personal attacks."
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty loaded headline there. But he goes on to say, about how Dave Williams is violating the 11th commandment, as the author is doing the same thing. So,
well, we don't know. It's a CPR article, so we have no idea that person's a Republican. In fact, they probably aren't.
Okay,
in which
fair
case,
enough.
That person isn't violating this.
But there are
11th
people.
commandment.
There are people in the party doing the exact same thing that they're accusing Dave Williams of doing.
Well, I would wonder, though, if there's a distinction in there, but we can talk about that as you continue.
Absolutely. And this is my first question to you. I wanted to kind of bring this up, but why do you, because I know you're anti Dave Williams.
Critical of him.
Critical. Okay, fair enough. Why, and you others in the party appear to have a personal vendetta against Chairman Williams?
Well, I think it's more about him acting in ways that advance himself personally than any sort of personal vendetta, at least on my part. I am looking at it from, I'm very much go at this from a journalist, because that's what I do nowadays, is delving into issues from a journalistic standpoint. And I mean, one of the biggest things for me is when you are elected party chairman, and then you use party resources specifically to advantage yourself relative to other candidates, particularly in your race, or to target a candidate that is a lead opponent for you, as is the case for Chairman Dave Williams down in the 5th Congressional District with Jeff Crank. That to me is woefully inappropriate and unethical. In the case of Williams and Crank, he has put out at least 2 emails officially from the state party, as well as a mailer that went out. I've never ever seen this before. Tell me when you've seen a Republican chairman put out materials like this in any race at any point in at least modern times for the Colorado Republican Party. I don't recall this ever happening, let alone in your own race. And I think that it is deeply unethical to use those kinds of resources in that way. And I really think that Dave Williams should have stepped down. Perfectly fine if he wants to run for the 5th Congressional District in a primary, but it gives the impression of putting your thumb on the scale, not just when you are doing both at the same time, but when you announce it. And you're the only candidate who announces your run on a state party platform, and you go ahead and use that platform to attack your lead opponent in your own race. And by the way, at the same time, you're not doing the same thing in any other congressional races. To my knowledge, I haven't seen anything from the party in other races that have been like this. Then to me, that says you really need to step down and you're doing it wrong.
Okay. In fairness, and I'm a good friend of Dave. So, you know.
And by the way, I have to say this on that personal thing. I don't know him too well, and I don't have anything personal against him, because I thought, okay, let's see how he does as state party chairman. And I don't think he's done a good job. And for me, it's not personal. I just want to make sure.
So I say that in full disclosure. So, just to put it in context. But with regards to the announcement was more of a notifying the state party body that he was intending to run for that seat when he decided to run. So it was more of a internal memo to the state central committee that he sent that memo out.
Hugo, let me just jump in and just say, it's one thing to do that as part of an update. It's another thing to include your own press release in there promoting yourself and why you're running. Those are two separate things. And he did both in that one email.
If I might actually jump in here for just a second as a kind of middle ground. I've met Dave before, but I don't know him that well. And being in Illinois politics for about 10, 12 years or so, we had situations where absolutely our state party was helping certain people and not everybody. In fact, I was in several situations where the party actually hindered certain candidates if they didn't like them in very much more ridiculous ways, even funding mailers against candidates they don't like, claiming that they were non-party, third party, whatever have you. So I definitely am against any usage of party resources for anything that isn't beneficial for elections. But if I might have a slight sort of jab into the ethics question, should somebody naturally use the resources they have if the seat that they have is the party and not necessarily a Congress? Because to me, a political party is like a mafia. Their tactics are not necessarily going to be clean, and a ruthless approach might be much better on that party level, not to destroy any credibility, but to offer a strong foundation for candidates to stand upon. Obviously, if you are part of that party, like chairman, and trying to build your own foundation, you could see that as unethical, but you also could see that as a winning strategy. What would you say to that?
Well, okay, it could be a winning strategy, but a winning strategy does not an ethical one make. I mean, if you are in that position,
ethics become ethical with victory, though?
Here's a distinction. No, I don't believe so. I don't think that the ends justify the means.
That's fair
but
enough.
I will make a couple of points in that regard. Number one, let's make a distinction, and I assume that you might get to this, Hugo, which would be Ken Buck, the now outgoing congressman. Set aside anything from the last year. Let's go back to 2019 and thereabouts, when he ran for state party chairman for the 2020 cycle. That was something he did, by the way, in essence, with the blessing of the Trump folks, because it takes that sort of thing with those relationships in a presidential election year to say, okay, that's fine. Ken Buck ran for that position without being in a primary for his reelection bid, number one. He didn't expect any payment, number two. Number three, the whole idea, whether you voted for him or not, the whole premise of his argument was, I'm going to help with fundraising and building with those RNC connections and with the Trump connections and all of that. And I'm going to appoint a CEO. We're just talking about the argument that people understood. And so I said, I'm going to appoint a CEO, and that was Steve House. In fact, I remember Steve House coming in studio and making that case as to how that arrangement was going to be set up. And of course, midway through, Steve House decided, I'm running for CD6. And guess what? Steve House left that position as CEO because he knew he needed to and
Right.
couldn't be in the party, an official party position, and then ran for CD6. And Don Itterberg, former party vice chair, was plugged into that position. But this was something that voters decided in the Central Committee in making Ken Buck the chairman. This was going to be the arrangement. And so you have very big differences there between that situation with Ken Buck and this situation with Dave Williams, who's both being paid and using party resources. And he never told folks and said, you know what, if there's an opportunity for me to run for Congress, I'm going to do that as part of my bid for, or as part of when I'm state party chairman. And so there's that sort of deception, I think, for people who are thinking, I'm voting for you as the state party chairman and not to use resources to your own advantage.
But
I think there are distinctions there that are important.
One of the distinctions that I would make is that the Central Committee back then was much different than it is today. It's totally different body and made up of different people who think.
How is that relevant?
Well, it's relevant, and I was dead set against Ken Buck being chairman as a congressman. I did not vote. I was at that meeting and the election. I campaigned against him and basically did not want him because he was a congressman, and I knew most of his time was going to be in D.C. So what kind of chairman is that? And so if I even had a conversation with Steve about, I said, Steve, why aren't you just running for re-election and stay as chairman instead of letting Ken Buck get in here and then turn around and basically giving you the mantle? And that would have made more sense to me. But there were several other candidates. I can't remember. There was a state representative that was running. I can't remember.
Didn't
her name.
Susan Beckman run in?
Susan Beckman. Susan.
Yeah.
That's who I supported. I thought that was my choice as far as my vote for that particular race. But, the vote was taken and Ken Buck was elected. And I knew right away that all his promises and everything were empty promises. He didn't deliver on anything that he said he was going to deliver. He didn't bring in the big dollar donors and everything and prop up the party.
Actually, I would dispute that. I think he and Cory Gardner together did a pretty good job. From my recollection. And I don't mean in terms of the fundraising piece.
I'm not saying he didn't do anything. I'm saying not to the level that he led the body.
But name me a Republican Party chairman who has done that. From Dave Williams on down for years and years and years, we have not had that. A state party chair that actually brought the kinds of successes that we would have liked to see.
I'm glad you brought that up, Jimmy, because my next point is this. Okay. Here we are with a faction out there trying to basically lambaste Chairman Williams for allegedly running the party into the ground. But I can go back to Dick Wadhams, Jeff Hayes, Steve House, Christie, all of them. They all lost historic elections for the party. And I don't see anybody that's criticizing Dave, criticizing any of those past chairmen.
Well, let me be clear that my criticisms of Dave Williams have been separate from that. I'm not talking about those aspects, and I'm not the person. You need to talk to somebody else who's making those sorts of claims. What I'm saying is, regardless,
you're not in the camp saying that Dave is running the party into the ground?
I don't know enough about some of the specifics as far as the fundraising numbers and some of these things to be able to make that claim. To me, I think he has been very unethical and that he has also engaged in untruths in several ways. And I think that that's the problem to me, in large part for his time as chairman. But I want to say that regardless of what Democrats in Chicago have done as far as using politics, or Republicans in Chicago for that matter, Chicago's a heck of a place when it comes to politics. No matter how they have used their positions of power in the party, that doesn't provide justification for Dave Williams to say, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and make the Republican Party of Colorado my personal plaything in a variety of ways, regardless of who's on the Central Committee. So I would put to both of you, but particularly to you, Hugo, how is it ethical or appropriate for the state party chairman to use the email list of the GOP and the email infrastructure of the GOP in an official capacity, as well as GOP resources in putting out a mailer to finance his own opposition to his own candidate, or rather to finance his campaign's opponent, going after his opponent?
In fairness, with regards to Jeff Crank, who is heading up or part of the leadership at AFP, AFP went rogue when they came out and said, we are anti-Trump and we're going to back Nikki Haley. And that turned off a lot of grassroots conservatives in Colorado who support Trump. And now we can go back and forth about, what the makeup of the state is and who really is a staunch Trump supporter. I don't know where you stand, and I don't know what you have personally against Trump. But here's the deal. Oh, I sounded like Joe Biden.
Yes, you did. Oh, gosh. Nick, he's channeling Uncle Joe.
Oh, my God, folks. I channeled down Uncle Joe.
See, we made fun of him so much, now we're starting to act like him. It rubs off.
And I caught myself. Okay, so what happened? What I see as two different things. Okay, one, we can argue and we can disagree on what's ethical or unethical, but the other one that's been thrown out there is that he's violated party bylaws, and I have scoured the party bylaws, and there isn't one thing that he has violated. So.
It's about endorsing a candidate.
Nope.
And he's effectively advocated for a candidate, which is a de facto
endorsement.
No. I'm talking about Dave Williams' campaign and how party resources have effectively operated as a de facto endorsement of Dave Williams for CD5.
That's kind of a stretch.
How is it a stretch?
Public action to say, hey,
it's not like he's saying, well, the Colorado GOP endorses Dave Williams for CD5.
But let's say that for some reason, Ken Buck was still running for Congress, and he had a couple, and Lauren Boebert decided, I'm going to move to CD4 and challenge him. And then you had a different state party chairman who said, or Ken Buck was still state party chairman and was using the party perch to go after Lauren Boebert in that way. Then that, I would submit to you, is a de facto endorsement of himself running for that office. But can I just say something about the Jeff Crank piece? Because you're making a fair point. There are a lot of folks who are concerned about that aspect of the race. That's a major critique of Jeff Crank. He was pictured with Nikki Haley, supposedly supported her, although he says he supported Donald Trump. Regardless, he was plugged in with AFP and worked for AFP, and AFP endorsed Nikki Haley. So there are reasons that people can argue, okay, Jeff Crank has problems. Fair enough. But that doesn't mean that the state party has the right to single out one particular candidate for one particular office that just so happens to be that, just by chance, happens to be that of the state party chairman who is running against that individual in Jeff Crank, and to level that particular attack. It is one thing for Dave Williams' campaign to say, hey, this is something you should be worried about with Jeff Crank. Let me put out the mailers. Let me put out the emails under the auspices of Dave Williams for CD5. It's an entirely different matter when the state party uses its resources to, for whatever argument they're making, go after and single out a particular candidate who, again, happens to be the state party chairman.
Are you insinuating that he's using state party money?
Yes. If you're using the official state party email account, and if you're putting out a mailer into people's boxes that says paid for by Colorado GOP, that's using state party resources.
Jimmy, you remind me a lot of the people I used to work with primarily. You were very concerned about the ethical presentation of the party, not just presentation, but actual ethical body of the party, and I absolutely admire that. One thing that kind of was broken for me, though, over time in politics, was this sort of grand adherence to the rules. I definitely am a bit of a maverick. I would advocate if you can break the rules and it leads to positivity, I am all for that, as long as it's not a law. I do not mind any rule breaking, even if it is criticism of other conservatives, if they deserve it. Because I think one sort of side point is we got to move away from thinking that criticism is opposition. We engage in politics to assimilate each other. We're meant to fight each other, beat each other, move to different war bands, as it were. We got to start thinking about this much more maturely. And I like both approaches that we have, because I think we represent the two halves of the millennial Republicans, people who are very, again, maverick, more radical. They, like myself, care very much about the immediate future for our generation, and people like you who absolutely see the long term of what we need as well. I think we need both of those visions.
Well, I would actually agree with that, but at a fundamental level, and by the way, I do think that looking at the long game is important, because that's how the left has been able to gain tremendous ground in Colorado. And you look, I mean, I always look at 1913. Just let me say this aside for a moment. 1913 as the big jumping off point for our country and a jolt to socialism, progressivism, whatever term you want to use. So you can look, Woodrow Wilson took office, the Federal Reserve Act went into
effect. We had
actual
socialists running for president back then.
The 16th and 17th Amendments happened, and the 17th Amendment dramatically changed the structure of the Senate so that it was no longer representing the interests of the states, but instead was all about having senators play to the passions of the moment for individuals. And again, the income tax, like all these, and then you can chart the growth in government because they were playing the long game. And I do think it's important, especially if you have the concerns that you're expressing, Nick, to look at the long game. But let's go back to the Dave Williams piece, because this to me isn't just about ethics. This is about the fairness that is required. And I don't mean this in some left-wing equitable context. I mean in terms of a state party chair or a state party that is supposed to provide the opportunity for candidates to compete on a level playing field, however they're going to, and to skew that in favor of a candidate. I don't think you can have an ends justify the means argument there, because then you also have to accept the argument that, and maybe you do, maybe you support Dave Williams in the race. Honestly, I don't know. I don't know Jeff Crank much. I met him back in 2016 when we were both at the RNC. That's about it. But regardless, you have to make and imply a case that Dave Williams is the best person to get to the point that you're raising in terms of justification. And I think that's unfair to everybody who disagrees, who may be in the 5th Congressional District.
I agree. It absolutely could be unfair, because I agree. If it turns out that it's exactly as you say and your worries are completely founded, that is awful. And that is sort of the difficulty both in, I think that's also a lot of why there's a lot of distrust of Trump a lot of the time. When you have tactics like this, and it really comes from, being from New York or being from a big city, Denver, Chicago, you become a little ruthless. People are absolutely suspicious of that, because if it goes wrong, it goes very wrong. That is what any gamble is, risk reward. So I agree, but I do want to say that I've seen the GOP play it safe my entire life, and the only time I've ever seen the GOP succeed is when we go a little maverick. So I am okay with that if it is the result. And we have been getting results through these ways. So we
I disagree.
Actions and outcome is all we can see, because we could talk and talk. Well, based on their actions is how we're going to judge.
No, but I don't think that this is that maverick move in that way. I think that this is the
it's much more mafia if it's the way you're saying it. But again, politics is very much
but here's the thing. Sure, you can look at outcomes how you want to, especially if you might be somebody who's favorable to Dave Williams. But there are a hell of a lot of people who are looking at this and saying, "Hey, this is Dave Williams as chairman of the party putting his thumb on the scale for an outcome that we believe is going to be a worse outcome." And unfortunately, they don't have any say in the matter, because Dave Williams has decided to take it upon himself and just continue along this pathway. And so that's where I think that it is wrong-headed, and why I do believe that if he's going to run for office, he should do what Steve House did in 2020 and step down from that position. I think that would not only be the right thing and the fair thing to do, but it would be the thing that everybody who has ever done this, like Bob Beaupre going back to the early 2000s, did that exact same thing. Because never before has somebody said in this state of Colorado, maybe over in, Chicago, it's different, but I don't prefer the Chicago way. Quite frankly, I prefer approaching it where we can have Republicans duke it out amongst themselves and see what ends up happening. And you know what? I will say this about Dave Williams. He is going to, no matter what, bring a fight. And he doesn't need the state party resources and shouldn't use the state party resources to bring that fight. He can do that himself, and I think pretty darn well.
Okay.
Fair
Well,
enough. We'll see how it turns out.
we'll
It'll
see
be
how that
interesting.
plays out. Let me shift a little bit to a different topic in the state party and the state in particular. There's a popular notion amongst never Trumpers that the state of the party in Colorado can be directly traced to Trump's appearance on the political scene. So is that a fair assessment, given the fact that the infamous blueprint, aka the Rocky Mountain heist, was implemented by Democrats and their deep pocket allies long before Trump even thought about running for president?
Who do you want to take that first?
Go ahead, Nick.
Okay.
Give us your
Nick,
take.
you go first. Go ahead.
Well, I certainly first learned about Colorado during the Trump election in 2012, everything like that. It was where we were deciding to move, me and my wife, and we definitely were looking at the politics. And I actually had a lot of friends who were more leftist than we were in Denver.
Correction, Trump was 2016, not 2012.
True. Yep. Thank you for correcting me, Hugo. I appreciate that. Numbers flying everywhere. But it was very much so for me that I wanted to find a state where I could actually help stem the tide of what we had suffered in Chicago. I think that Colorado is at a point much earlier in the development of the Democrat machine and sort of control, and it absolutely can be fought against. I mean, the state itself is titled in Spanish "to turn red." Mm-hmm. There is always a destiny to this place becoming Republican, but the migration internally between states. Texas, California, New York, Illinois, all these places that have brought people to Colorado, I think it was perfect for Trump's genesis. I think that actually the decline of the Republican Party in Colorado, if it is attached to Trump, it's attached in the sense of that Democrats now believe that they needed to go after the Republicans, decrease their power in Colorado. Because let's be honest, we as a swing state threatens the Democrats. There's no wonder why we were one of the first to be hit, because if they could have won here, they could have won everywhere. It was relatively unpoliticized. People were very much middle of the road here for a long time. It made the state very wealthy, very attractive for people to move to. And very quickly, as the partisanship control of the Democrats needed to expound to ensure those electoral college votes, we have gotten all of this mess. So I think that it is sort of Trump's fault in the sense that they now need to worry about us taking over the state. And unfortunately, they drew their gun on us first. I think that's ultimately what happened. We are very quickly remaking gains in the state, and I think we can do even better. We've lost several races, but I think the spirit of Colorado has turned more red than ever. I have a lot of friends, even on the far left, who they can't support the Democrats because they believe that Joe Biden's promises are empty and that they aren't interested in helping the working class and the labor movement. They have no faith in Joe Biden, despite how much he touts, unions and everything. So I think definitely Trump has been more positive than negative, even if it hasn't always resulted in electoral victories.
So I think that there's a little bit of a rightward turn that is going on, although I think it's more of a frustration with Biden, and he's not. I go to, especially for younger folks, student loans and not doing this mass forgiveness because the Supreme Court did the right thing in stepping in the way on that, and on Israel and Hamas and the anti-Semitism that we see. And there are some other positions where Biden just hasn't carried that left flank enough for them, even though he's one of the most left-wing presidents that we have ever had. So square that circle for me, Nick. But I would look at this.
He doesn't do anything he promises.
So to me, it's two things. One, it has been with the blueprint and the march leftward. And that's particularly been because people have come from places like I did, which was upstate New York and New Jersey, but didn't, unlike my parents and myself, and my siblings, bring Republican values, but brought Democratic values. And we've seen that quite a bit.
I
And
thought
you can look at
upstate
the
New York
influx of
was
people.
conservative.
Well, actually, there's a lot of upstate New York that is fairly conservative. The Albany area, where we're originally from and where I was born, is more Democratic, although somehow my parents lucked out and most of their friends are Republicans that have been in the Albany area. But you're right. You go to a lot of parts in upstate New York. I mean, that's where Lee Stefanik is from. Lee Zeldin was. I mean, you have a lot of people in that part that, or maybe not Lee Zeldin, but there was a lot of support for him in his governor run. But I digress. You have a lot of people that have been Democrats coming in. You have the blueprint from the four horsemen of the apocalypse, including Jared Polis, now governor, and they were able to do a lot. But you also had a couple other factors. One, 2008, 2012, Barack Obama. He really helped to shift the Democrat position more strongly in this state. I mean, that's why they had the 2008 convention in Denver, and it really helped.
He was very articulate.
Yes. There was that. He was impassioned. I mean, say what you will. He's a damn good politician, one of the best politicians that we've had in a very long time, whether you like him or not. He was that. But then you get into 2016. And Trump won, or lost rather, by 4.9 percentage points. Then you get into 2020, and Trump lost by nearly 14 percentage points. Mm-hmm. And I do believe that you have seen, maybe not among Republicans, clearly he won the primary among those who showed up by a very substantial margin. I mean, 30 percentage points or whatever it was. That's a dramatic victory that shows Trump has a lock on Republicans in Colorado. But Republicans are in third place as far as voter registration. Obviously, the Democrats despise Trump, but among unaffiliateds, they predominantly do not like Trump. I think a lot of it has to do with personality over policy. And while I think in 2024, you will see an improvement, certainly from 2020, after all the failures that we've seen of Biden and the rest of the Democrats, I do think you're going to see Trump lose in 2024 by at least 5 to 10 percentage points, somewhere in there, because he is in Colorado, because I do think that he is in a way dramatically unpopular among people that are not going to change regardless of where they are in terms of Biden. I think you will see people less likely to turn out for Biden, which helps Trump, but it doesn't get Trump over that hump of still having a significant margin behind. Because think about it this way, and then I'll shut up and let you guys respond. In 2016, Trump was the new guy on the block. He was bringing something bold and brash, and you had him lose the state by less than 5 percentage points. That was substantially better than what he did in 2020 in Colorado. And so to me, a lot of people didn't like what they saw over the years and made it worse. So we'll see how much better Trump does in Colorado. But he is very unpopular here. And so I think it's a mix of factors, Democrat gains and Trump unpopularity, that I've heard.
Okay. I see where you're coming from. I kind of disagree in the sense that for me, my biggest passion has been the Hispanic vote here in the state. And I still contend that the savior of the Republican Party in this state will be eventually, if we do it right, the Hispanic vote. And I'll tell you why I say that. When I go out into the communities, and I've met with a lot of business people, individual Hispanic business owners, when I talk to them and sit down and have a cup of coffee, I see conservative people. Okay. It's a well-known fact that Hispanics live a very conservative life, faith, family, entrepreneur spirit, freedom. They came here for freedom and opportunity. And when you look at the average Hispanic voter and family, you see a conservative family in the way that they live their lives. Now, segue that into how they vote. And I attribute that to the fact that the left has done a very good job of messaging false narratives to them for such a long time. And our party has done a very poor job of countering that. Now, one of the things among Hispanics who love Trump, the biggest thing they love about him is that he's a fighter, that he doesn't take any guff from anybody, and that he's not beholden to anybody. This is why the elites in the Republican Party, the elites in Washington despise him, because they can't rein him in, they can't control him and manipulate him. So that's kind of my basic analysis of the whole picture there. I know it's a lot more detailed than that, but in a nutshell, that's my assessment of why Trump is despised by a lot of elitists. And in this state, you have what I call so-called Republicans. I'm going to be nice here, and who are never Trumpers. Now, Jimmy, I'm going to ask you the question: are you a never Trumper?
No. I mean,
Okay.
I voted for Trump twice. And
Okay.
quite frankly, just a little bit of history. In 2016, a month before the RNC, and of course, the Colorado delegation of the RNC was not very pro-Trump, I went on the radio and I said, we all need to vote for Donald Trump because Hillary Clinton in the Supreme Court, and he came out with that list of the potential justices. And
I was there.
damn, did I feel vindicated when that list came out. And then when
Yeah.
we got those three and not just the Supreme Court, but the lower courts. So no, you can't be a never Trumper if you're a two-time Donald Trump voter. And I think that
just wanted to clarify that because there's people throwing that label at you.
Sure.
The never Trumpers are fond of saying that they don't like Trump because of some of the things he says, the way he acts, and basically just so happens that a lot of Republicans, he's saying a lot of the things that Republicans are thinking. I'm not talking about the rank and file and what I consider the grassroots. About his many accomplishments in office, I think that's one of the most overlooked things. So what I ask people is, do you believe in voting for policies or personalities? And that's where the disconnect is, because I hear people all the time on the radio and on social media, and their biggest complaint about Trump is that he's childish, or he calls people names, or he does this or that. To me, I'm not saying that that's the best approach, but to me, I'm going to vote for policies over personality.
Hugo.
And
he's just a New Yorker. That's what people don't understand about Trump. He's just a New Yorker.
He's from Queens.
Yeah.
So I get that. And quite frankly, I mean, that was one of the big things where I was like, on Trump in 2016 in particular, because I saw this guy, but I calculated we needed to defeat Hillary Clinton. That was an existential proposition. And the Supreme Court, I mean, we knew, and within no time, you had Antonin Scalia, the late Justice Scalia, pass away. And then you had, say what you will about Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell was willing to push back and hold the line on that so that a Republican president in Donald Trump could get in office. And then we were able to have those three justices. But that aside, I think you can't discount the disdain that a lot of people have for him on a personal level. And here's why. Because I think that actually has driven the animosity in Colorado. And people are sort of tired of it. Yeah, they're tired of a lot of things with Biden. But a lot of the things that they would hear about Trump is all of these antics and the different issues that were going on amongst his administration and between him and cabinet secretaries and what have you. And he'd put out these tweets and all of these things where you had a lot of social stigma. I don't know when you got married, Nick, and how that was for you. But for me, I will say that I did, and I met my girlfriend this way, nice. A lot of online dating in various apps in different ways. And you would see, particularly during the 2020 cycle, the number of profiles that would say, if you voted for Trump, don't swipe right, don't do this, don't do that. I don't want to have anything to do with you. And you may say, oh, that's just a small thing. But what it showed to me is that, especially among younger people, there's a very strong social stigma that unfortunately has a lot of influence on how people vote. And that has impacted unaffiliated voters. And, I always go to this whole thing about, and this is sort of policy versus personality. Ben Shapiro has this statement: facts don't care about your feelings.
Yeah.
Well, guess what, Ben? Feelings don't care about your damn facts either. And so a lot of this,
absolutely
right. And so a lot of this is about, policy doesn't care about the personality. Okay, well, personality doesn't care about your policy in so many ways, especially when voters are looking at it. And so I think you have to consider that while people would say they want policy over personality, unfortunately in politics, so much of it is about personality. Look
when
at
they actually go to the ballot box.
Right. Look at 2012. Barack Obama was not a good president. We had all of these failures. You had ample reason, notwithstanding how Mitt Romney was not a great candidate. We don't need to go down that train. But Obama had this vibrant personality that people were drawn to, just like Bill Clinton in 1996, when he was running for re-election. People had that personal connection. Trump really was able to play into the personality positively in 2016. And unfortunately, I think that wore out in 2020. Well, the question is, will people look at the policy and the state of affairs with Biden versus Trump's personality in 2024 a little differently? And I think to an extent, yes. But I don't think you should overstate that, particularly in Colorado, is what I'm talking about.
Jimmy, I think you might agree that people, and Hugo, you might guys agree that people in Colorado tend to be very nice people.
Yeah.
Which is a lot of people say that about. Yeah, no, Hugo, it's true. If you lived here long enough, you realize they're nice.
I'm from Texas.
But
people are nice in Texas.
No, right. That's what I think is the big
point.
difference, especially culturally, is that the nicety and respect has different meanings to different people. Yeah. To people like Hispanics, for example, we see strength as respect. If you're acting like a weenie to me, I assume you disrespect me or something along these lines. That's very different from a lot of Americans who come from a completely different kind of culture where the etiquette is very important. Of course, Trump actually comes from an immigrant background himself, German and Scottish. So there is much more of that sort of tinge of the old country, this sort of thing that a lot of Democratic elites who, of course, Jimmy, I probably don't need to tell you about the, New England origins of the Democrats in a lot of ways and where their power base comes from. These people don't like people that are like us or Donald Trump in that sense. They just don't meld with us. It's just culturally not where they're at. And I think for younger people, we split down that middle really, really bad. There's some of us who we can take anything and, we whatever joke, and we're not afraid of dark humor and all this stuff, edgy meme lords and all that. But then we have the other side, which is more soft, more liberal, more, well, don't we want to just get along? And isn't what Trump's doing not very much like that? There's the sort of bouginess, but then there's also sort of the more, like you said, far leftist angle where it's about personality.
How do you reconcile the fact that what I'm reading is that the Gen Zers are shifting over to the right?
Because we don't see because they don't see a future. They really don't see a future. I think. But Jimmy, you look like you got something to say.
No, I actually think millennials are shifting rightward more than Gen Z is, and you actually see that bearing out in data. In fact, I wrote a column recently in the Denver Gazette where I was talking about how I actually think that over time in the next 5 to 10 years, Colorado will shift rightward at least a little bit, particularly because millennials now are 40% of Denver. You include every generation from Gen Alpha, which is younger than Gen Z.
So many of my friends moved to Denver from Chicago back in those times.
Sure. And so now that 40% millennials, and they're shifting rightward, particularly when see this in the Tabor votes in their state.
Yes.
On economic issues. And if in Colorado, if Republicans just pull back on a lot of the social stuff, I think that will help dramatically. But I do think you are seeing much more of a rightward shift because, and in fact, there was a New York Times article to this effect that said millennials are moving rightward, fitting in the trend with the previous generations that as they get older, they move more rightward. I don't actually see that in Gen Z as much yet. I think it will happen eventually.
No, I'm saying there's a movement. There is a movement from Gen Z in this particular cycle because they've seen who Joe Biden is, and a lot of them have graduated college and they're starting families, and they're seeing the economy and their inability to buy a house, and get ahead. So many Gen Zers don't have vehicles. They live in these,
Yeah.
urban apartments sections, and they Uber and
A-
Lyft all the.
Actually, Hugo, you might find this interesting that I mostly worked with in my day job with 19-year-old Gen Zers. And Hugo, have you noticed people as they get younger, their good old days becomes a little bit sillier? Oh, I remember, your good old days might be when you're 20s or 30s. Mine is, teenagers, for these Gen Zers, oh man, when I was 8, 10 years old, that time was the best. It's never going to get any better than that.
Right.
That's Biden's America right there. All the
I'm going to argue the '60s were the best.
Everyone's got their wonderful America, and that's what we have to do is bring all of those wonderful Americas through all generations, all the decades, and make that the Republican platform.
Sure.
That's what we can get back to you.
I think
Well,
there's a great point.
if I had one of my wishes, I wish that the Democrat Party would actually go back more towards the '60s and '70s, because they were not controlled by
JFK.
radicals back then. They were, at least, we
yeah.
were able to have a
They were
conversation.
getting there, yeah, Jimmy, you're right. They were getting in there, the radicals, like Saul Alinsky and those guys,
Oh, yeah.
But there was a time where their minds were clean.
Now, I do want to say this. I hope you're right, Hugo, about the trend. I mean, we do see it in some of the data in terms of Hispanics, but the question is, will they turn out? And that is something that hasn't been quite as successful amongst both Hispanics and Blacks who have trended, particularly with some of the things that Trump did, a little bit more rightward. It's a matter of actually getting out and voting. And if that turnout happens, I think that will certainly help in terms of Republicans to make some inroads and traction. But you also have to look at the demographics. And the fact is that Colorado is a predominantly white state at this point. And that's where you see, and maybe this goes to some of the cultural points that you guys were pointing out, that's where you see so much more of the Trump opposition, especially amongst college-educated white voters who are Trump's biggest problem and are, I think, a majority, or at least a plurality of voters in Colorado.
I just want, my wish for the Republican Party in general, not just in Colorado, but nationally, is that they stop ignoring the big elephant in the room, which is the Hispanic population. Because by 2050, Hispanics will basically represent about 1/3 of the electorate. That's a fact. We reproduce at a faster pace than any other demographic, and because we're family oriented and we grow families. So that's happening. I don't care what anybody says. And as long as we have leadership at both the state level and national level that don't understand that, we're going to continue to struggle. Now, we're making headway, but we need to make more headway in the sense that we need to message to that population to make them feel welcome, because that's one thing I hear back from people out in the community. I ask them, you're conservative by the way you live your life, but you vote with people that are voting against your own values. And I say, why? And they say, we don't feel welcome in the Republican Party.
So, Hugo, can I ask you a question then as we wrap up, because I got to get going here in a moment. But it's been a great conversation with you guys. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. What can people who are not Hispanics do in terms of incorporating and saying you're welcome in our party? What can Republicans do to embrace and welcome in and encourage Hispanics to get more involved in the party and to vote Republican?
I have spoken on this topic. Hold on, I'll let you.
No, you go first.
I've spoken on this on many occasions throughout my tenure at CHR. And the one thing I tell people is, you can't just go knocking on doors in an election cycle and ask for people to vote for you. Okay. Mm-hmm. You have to have a relationship with someone before they're going to trust what you say.
Yeah.
And building relationships is step number one. And so we all live, our lives. We work with people who are Hispanic. Our children go to school, they play sports, they do all these things, but you don't see them interacting outside of that. And I asked this question to people at groups that I've spoken to. I said, when was the last time that you invited your Hispanic neighbor over for a barbecue? And, well, never. And I say, why not? They're your neighbor. Is it because you're prejudiced, or is it because you just are afraid to reach out and make a connection? People are people, people like people who interact with them. And most people are not racist. They don't care who you are, whether you're black, brown, purple, green. They just want people to act like people. And if they're your neighbor, of all people, you should be having a connection with them. If nothing else, to have a community like we used to have when I was growing up. We knew everybody on the block,
Our
and
generation definitely does not have that, does it, Jimmy?
Yep. So that's the answer to that is we have to build relationships first.
That's such a profoundly important point. And Nick, I want to hear what your take is, but I just want to say, I remember growing up as a millennial kid, interestingly, in New Jersey. We moved here when I was 10 and a half, but we lived in a neighborhood that was very close knit, and we had block parties and we had all these things where there really was a sense of community. We have lost that. And that's something that I think millennials had lost throughout the course of our life. And bringing that back, I think you make a very important point. Nick, what do you think?
I think you can kill two birds with one stone there. I mean, politics and religion has been taken out of the taboo areas. I mean, philosophy is something interesting to a lot of younger generations. There's a desire to be academic, and that benefits the Republicans because we are the party of facts over the party of, I wouldn't even just say feelings. I would say train tracks of feelings. You get put on a track when you're in the Democrats to feel a certain way. We have feelings in the Republican Party, but they're genuine, and I think that what makes us a little bit impermeable to people who have never been around us. I mean, how do you go from the sort of dead party life of a Democrat to the real fiesta of the Republicans? It takes time to assimilate, and I agree, Jimmy. The logistics for getting the minority communities to the ballot box, that is in its primordial infancy at this point. There's so much media, there's so much really, really good stuff when it comes to politics and culture in the minority communities, but that pipeline to the ballot box to make sure that all of that work actually gets somewhere at the end of the day, that does need to be worked on. And that it can only be done by the parties, by the individual paper pushers.
And we need to push back against this false narrative, in my opinion, of identity politics. It's not identity politics
it's just working with
to
who
want to bring people into the party, no matter what the race is. Okay,
right.
It's just factual data that exists that is not going to change, and if we ignore it as Republicans, I say we ignore it at our own peril.
We love our own family first, but that doesn't mean we don't love every other family.
Now, remember this about Democrats and getting people into the polls. They've always been good at that, busing people, saying, hey, let's get together after church at black churches, for example, or what have you. Yes, and going back to those days, they've always been so good at that. Maybe it's the independence of Republicans that's sort of like, it's our personal responsibility, so you get to the polls, and we're not going to do as much about getting you there. Or, there's a lot more talk on the right about how Republicans need to start engaging in ballot harvesting because the Democrats are so good at it. However you want to approach that issue, the fact of the matter is, they bring their people out. We don't. And Republicans now, again, dramatically now in Colorado, are in the third place as far as voter registrations. It's unaffiliated, it's far and away, followed by Democrats, followed by Republicans. And we need to be guided in that.
Just a little caveat on that. I'm not one to, cast aspersions on people that want to register more people. That's all fine and dandy. But my focus is not so much on how people are registered, but how they vote. And because you can find Democrats that will vote for a Republican and unaffiliated, are voting about 65% Democrat right now. So it's a matter of the issues and convincing people that they're voting against their own self-interest, so to speak. And they're using excuses that have nothing to do with who you're electing.
We need all the data we have. We really
do. I sent you an article, Jimmy. I don't know if you got a chance to see it yet, but I sent you an email with an article that was very interesting about the 2020 election and voter fraud.
I saw it come in. I haven't had a chance.
And there is new evidence now. So I encourage you to read that one. It's a very nice article. And I learned a few things. I didn't get to see the whole thing, but I read enough to.
But if
see.
You like it, come back on and talk about it with us.
Absolutely.
We really enjoyed you.
I'll keep that in mind. Nick, we have not met before, actually, Hugo. I would appreciate if you would connect us because
that'd be a lot of fun.
I've enjoyed the conversation, and I think Nick and I can have some more conversations offline, and who knows, in other forums and vehicles as well.
That sounds fun, actually. Jimmy, I actually saw you interviewed someone from Sweden on. I actually do a lot of work with Europe myself. My mom is Polish, so I'd love to maybe come on your show, talk about that kind of stuff because World War is going to affect our generation if it happens.
Yep.
Sure. Well,
I want to close. I want to close on this note here that for all the viewers out there, hopefully we have plenty of viewers out there that are going to see this or saw this live and then also see it on a recorded basis. But Jimmy and I are an example of we can disagree on some things, but we still remain friends. So.
Hugo, to that point, you have pissed me off, brother, just as I have pissed you off. Like
that's what true friends do.
That has happened in the past where I'm like, oh my gosh, what the hell is Hugo doing now? But hey, here we are all this time later.
I have my detractors out there. I had some social media.
As do I.
We're meant to be the salt of the earth,
Well, we all do. I mean, that's part of it. But Jimmy, I want to, just thank you for taking the time to come on. It has been a lively discussion, and I think we ran a lot longer than we normally do for our show, but I think it was well worth it, and we need to keep in touch and and just further the common cause because we're all three of us here are going in the same direction. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we just have a little different way of getting there, but
the country needs all of us.
Bottom line is we do believe in what we need to do as a party, but also as Americans, and try to get this country back to where it needs to be.
Amen. Our
candidate is Donald Trump, like it or not. So people out there, pay attention to what you're going to be voting for. And if you are part of the detractors that are going to say cast a protest vote, just remember you're not part of the solution. You're part of the problem because our enemy is on the other side.
And make sure that you participate in these congressional races because especially we talked about CD5 earlier. We talked about CD4, CD3, all of them where you have primaries. Yep. And even if you don't have a primary, I think in the 6th congressional district, John Fabricatori, who's a great guy, you should get him on your podcast if you can, a former ICE director, field director. And he's running in the 6th congressional district, I think unopposed. I could be mistaken in that. Even if you have a guy like him running unopposed, get out there and vote to show that Republicans have numbers.
Yeah, we need to get Crow out of there for sure.
Jason Crow has got to go. Now, that's a big uphill climb.
Absolutely.
But yeah, Jason Crow has got to go. But just an admonition to make sure that you are participating in these primaries, not just congressional, but you have county commissioner primaries. You have state legislature. You've got a number of different races, and you got to get involved in all of them.
Yeah, we got to guard against the left trying to give immigrants or illegal immigrants the right to vote. I mean, there was a ruling up in upstate New York, I think, appeals court that declared it unconstitutional for New York that had put out that they were going to let illegals vote in local elections, and they said no, that's unconstitutional.
Yeah, there's been a push.
Guys, you are the front line to all of this. Well, you are the voters. You are the guys involved and girls involved in the process. Get involved. We need to.
Well, thank you guys. I mean, this has been a great show, and I hope everyone out there enjoyed it. And we look for feedback. I want to get people giving us feedback of what they think and what they like. Go to our website, follow us on YouTube, on X, and if you're inclined, throw a little cash in there. We need the help. So help us out. And we'll continue to get the word out and do the best we can.
Yeah, get engaged. And if anybody wants to send me some hate mail, JimmySengenberger.com, all the time. You can go ahead and do so. I had nice stuff. I'm a nice guy. I'd like some
All
nice
right.
messages to come in. But you guys, this was great. I really appreciate it. Of course, I'll do it anytime. Hugo, our friendship endures. Nick, great to meet you.
Friendship
And I look
begins.
forward to more as our friendship begins, indeed.
Very nice.
All right.
Great to
Thank
meet
you.
you, Jimmy.
Thank you
And
both.
good night. And God bless America.
God bless you, everyone. Take care.